Nothing in this podcast is intended as investment advice, and the people in this podcast may hold positions in the stocks they talk about. Do not buy any investment based solely on a tip or recommendation. Please do your own research.
Hello and welcome to the Midweek Takeaway. Today we're joined by Oliver Friesen, CEO and Executive Director of Golden Metal Resources. Welcome, Oliver.
Thanks for having me on, Jens. Looking forward to chatting today.
No worries. Firstly, congratulations on the recent IPO and admission to AIM. Golden Metals is now trading under the ticker GMET. I bet that's quite a relief to have the listing and start trading this week, right?
Yeah, Phil, it definitely took a lot longer than we originally had anticipated. Most of your listeners are, I'm sure, acutely aware to the market conditions of most of 2022. There's very few listings that actually made it through the process here in the UK, and it was just a tough time. So we were actually looking originally to list in 2022, or that was the intention, but the market conditions just persisted. So we just kind of held off. And now here we are in May, and I think, there's still some weakness in the market, but I think the reality is there's also some strengths that are showing through here. I mean, you look at the price of gold, a lot of the equities haven't necessarily caught up, but I think it's a bit of a bellwether here as to where we're going. So I think the timing ended up kind of working in our favor, because I wouldn't have wanted to list this company in November or December of 2022. So here we are, and I'm a lot more bullish and optimistic about where things are probably going to go here.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, before we start delving into Golden Metals itself, I'd like you to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your interest in history.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a geologist by trade, Phil. So I'm a technical, kind of person in the background here. I'm born and raised in Vancouver. So for those of your listeners that follow the industry quite closely, Vancouver and Toronto and Canada are certainly a bit of a hotbed for activity within this space. So in Vancouver specifically, it's kind of all around you. When I first went to university there at UBC, you have junior mining companies kind of, even as a first year student, coming and knocking down your door looking to get you flown up to different parts of Canada and US to work. So spent the first sort of 10 years of my career mostly in the technical kind of field space, ran a lot of exploration programs for different companies. Actually used to live in Nevada, so I worked for Barrick Gold for a good period of time there at their Cortez Hills mine, which ended up being a 15 million ounce gold discovery. So had some really hands-on experience in Nevada, which has sort of come full circle with Golden Metal Resources now. And then kind of in the last 5 to 6 years here, ended up starting a geological consulting company with some of my partners, and we oversaw and managed pretty complex exploration programs for junior listed companies. Most of those traded in Canada on the TSX, TSXV. So throughout that, did a lot of work through Western Canada, British Columbia, and then a lot of work once again down into Idaho and in Nevada. So got a lot more experience with Nevada and those jurisdictions during that time. And then obviously naturally working for the junior mining companies, started to kind of gravitate more towards the commercial corporate side of the business, had some directorships and other sort of management roles within junior mining companies. And then made the move about 2 years ago to London, Phil. Met up with Paul Johnson, who was the former CEO of Power Metal Resources. And we wanted to bring, high quality packages of assets to the UK, which is a very underserved market compared to, you look at Canada or Australia. Kind of sat down and said, well, where do we start? And with my experience in Nevada and my connections in Nevada and looking at the UK markets, there's really no pure play way for investors to get exposure to what is now ranked the best jurisdiction in the world for mining investment. So we said, let's start there. So we slowly over the last 2 years built the company up, acquired assets, put it all together. And here we are 2 years later with a listing on AIM here, which is super exciting.
Very good. That all sounds very interesting. So you've been involved over your whole career with this type of thing. So tell us a little bit about the assets that are in the company. Golden Metal Resources, we have, is it 4 key investments that we have within it?
Yeah, that's correct, Kevin. So we, our flagship asset is the 100% owned Pilot Mountain project, which hosts the largest undeveloped tungsten resource and most advanced as well, I should note, resource in the United States of America. So that's certainly a significant focal point of the business is that project. And then we have 3 other really interesting assets in that portfolio. The second one is a project called Golconda Summit, which is a Carlin type gold property. A Carlin type gold, I'll just have a quick kind of a note here on that because many listeners potentially aren't aware of those type of gold deposits. They're found almost exclusively within Northern Nevada. So it's a deposit style that's unique to that area, but they're some of the largest and highest grade gold deposits in the world. If you look at the likes of Newmont's and Barrick Gold, that's kind of where they focus their businesses in Nevada because they control some of the largest Carlin-type gold deposits in that part of the world. So having that Golconda Summit in the portfolio, and as I mentioned previously, used to work for Barrick Gold at their Cortez Hills mine, which was a Carlin-type gold discovery. So it was really important when we built this business from the ground up to have a Carlin-type opportunity for UK investors to get exposure to. And then on top of that, we have our Garfield and Stonewall assets, which are a combination of precious and base metal assets as well. So really good, well-balanced portfolio. But the focal point is certainly a Pilot Mountain right now with that large tungsten resource.
So tell us a little bit about this tungsten resource. It's been bopping around for 10 years now or more, I think, in terms of the world of mining. So tell us a little bit about its history and where we are now, because I think we're in a very, very different time and place than we were 10 years ago when it was first brought on board by Power Metals and other companies that were involved.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kevin. And as you mentioned, and I guess as a note, most advanced assets that you find anywhere in these stable jurisdictions have been around for, generally decades. Kind of switched hands a few times. The markets have changed, have shifted, didn't make sense at certain times, or certain companies kind of ran out of cash. So you find a lot of times these really valuable and interesting assets have sort of switched hands multiple times. And your job is to look back and go, okay, well, why didn't it work? Why didn't it work before? What has changed now? Why are we so optimistic about where this project could go now? And the reality is that you mentioned, there's been a very significant paradigm shift that's really happened in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war, which is shifting things to the point where, a lot of these conditions that persist now have never, ever been seen in the mining industry, which is super exciting. So the U.S. specifically, in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war, it's become so paramount and front of mind for a lot of these government agencies and governments in general to start to secure the domestic sources of strategic battery and defense metals. Before that, there wasn't really the push to have domestic sources because you didn't really need them, or that wasn't as important. But you saw how quickly, the likes of Russia could weaponize some of these things, and China as well. So when you look at some of these metals now and you go, okay, well, why is this so important? Well, tungsten has a really important story, and in particular because China controls more than 80% of total global market share of tungsten. So when you look at the fact that the U.S. currently does not actually mine any of their own tungsten, they don't have any operating tungsten mines at the moment. Their biggest import partner is China for tungsten, and globally, tungsten is something that is certainly front of mind right now with a lot of the use cases for that metal. So why, just to kind of loop back once again there, Kevin, tungsten specifically in this project, it's been looked at multiple times by different operators. Technologies have changed. There's actually quite a significant copper credits as well with this particular property. So it was actually evaluated and explored for copper specifically. But here we are now in 2023. The U.S. government is now actively putting money behind projects that are located on American soil that can solve some of these defense metal, these battery metal issues. And tungsten and Pilot Mountain specifically, as I mentioned, is the largest undeveloped tungsten resource in the U.S. So the Department of Defense right now is actively looking for input metals that are on U.S. soil. So that kind of all wrapped up together, I think should highlight to the listeners how strategic this asset is.
It's quite ironic, really, that it's called Pilot Mountain, because I'm sure Lockheed Martin F-35 fighters would be quite happy to use your tungsten, yes, because it must be a big component of a lot of these fighter planes.
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the many ways that tungsten is used. It's really unique metal because of its high melting point, high density. So it's almost irreplaceable in most modern technologies. And as you mentioned, right now, a lot of the tungsten that they use in these different facilities and these companies is coming from China. It's coming from Russia. And as of actually, just a point of note here, Kevin, is that the Department of Defense just recently announced that as of January 1st, 2026, so less than 3 years away, they're banning all imports of tungsten from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea for the use in the defense industry. So when China's your biggest import partner and you're effectively saying within 2 and a bit years here, we can't take any tungsten in from them, well, they need to go find some more tungsten. And when we're sitting on Pilot Mountain on American soil, I think it kind of shows how significant and excited we are about this project and where this is going.
So you could be having a visit from Lockheed Martin shortly then in Nevada. Saying
we'd happily have them on site.
Can we have a joint venture with you for all the tungsten that you'll produce?
I mean, it's phenomenal how many uses it's actually got when you delve deeper, isn't it? You got, you've got the renewable energy side, obviously in wind turbines, so that's obviously very current. You got jewelry, obviously for use for the lack of scratching on there. You got the medical uses of it, X-ray tubes, etc. Alloys, technology, and tungsten carbide is a favorite one for the drill bits, wasn't it? Because obviously of how hard and the density element. But I think, as you say, it's essential for economy and national security now, right?
Absolutely, Phil. And when almost 10% of total tungsten that's mined around the world goes into the defense industries. I mean, you think of what the defense industry means to the U.S. Department of Defense there has by far and away the biggest defense budget of any country in the world. So when it comes to securing the input metals and the location and where those come from, that's kind of front and center. And also, just another note here, Phil, you spoke about all those different uses of tungsten. And one that I think I'll just kind of highlight here quickly, because most people aren't aware of this. And there's sort of, when it comes to nuclear fusion, there's sort of a lot of debate about, when this technology can actually be commercial. But there's a lot of huge R&D facilities being built now as they continue to perfect and as they continue to refine what nuclear fusion actually is going to look like in the future. And a lot of people that are in the know say, well, once we do get this sorted, this is going to be kind of the ultimate way to power the world going forward. But what's really interesting to me is I've done some digging as to how tungsten is involved within this particular technology. And because the reaction that they're creating to harness this energy is so high temperature, they realize that only tungsten is the metal that can line these reactor walls. So what's interesting was I was doing some digging as to the actual volume of tungsten that could be needed within this industry. And one number that really blew me away was one of the large scale nuclear fusion reactors that could be built in the future would require the same amount of tungsten that is consumed annually across the entire globe. That's one particular facility. So, whenever this technology sort of continues to progress here, no one's talking about the tungsten that's going to be needed in nuclear fusion. Well, just another use case that should be on people's radar. And I've actually tweeted about this a few times. If you look at my Twitter, you'll see some information on how tungsten is involved in that industry.
Yeah, so you did the 2018 scoping study, which was completed, and I know that you've obviously got the next steps are to receive, compile, analyze, and release the geophysical results, which cover multiple high-priority exploration targets across the project. And I think in one of your decks, you released like a fact sheet on the pilot. But basically, you talked about an annual production of around 687 million tons of tungsten. Just what would that mean if it's in full production swing in terms of revenues for the company going forward?
Yeah, so just on that scope, I think it's important to know that was done in 2018. One of the main things that we're going to be doing here, Phil, is exploration. As a geologist myself, looking to continue to grow their resource. So we have a really strategic in-ground resource as it stands right now. But one of the important things we're going to be pushing forward here is looking to expand that resource. But as it stands right now, you mentioned 687 metric tons of tungsten per year. I encourage those listening to go to our Twitter to have a look at that fact sheet, because I break down some of the metrics and why this particular project is so important. But as I mentioned, China is currently the largest import partner of tungsten into the United States of America. And as also mentioned, in 2026 here for the Department of Defense uses, all tungsten from China will be banned. So if you take that, it's about 30 to 35% of total U.S. annual imports that come from China. Pilot Mountain alone could replace, this singular project could replace more than 25% of those annual imports that come from China. So a very significant portion of that sort of net amount that needs to be made up here could come from Pilot Mountain alone. And that doesn't take into consideration any exploration that we do to advance or grow that resource. That's if we were to go into production today, which is super exciting.
So there is tungsten.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yes, sir. How much tungsten do you believe? I mean, you have already a report, but in terms of the total size of this project, what is potentially the size of it? And obviously, I know you're a geologist and you guess, but we'll want you to guess.
No, of course, Kevin. And that's when I first looked at this project, that's kind of the natural question that I asked as a geologist is how big could this be? A really important strategic resource as it stands right now. But, we're an exploration company and a lot of people that invest in us don't want us just to go into development and, burn cash. They want us to go make new discoveries, right? They want, when they invest in this space, they want those really outsized returns, as I do as well. So that's kind of how I look at these things. In terms of how big this could get, what we have right now is 12.53 million tons mineralized rock, which has been included into a mineral resource estimate. Where do we go from here? Well, one thing I will just point out here is a report that was done by the predecessor company who looked at potentially what could the size of the prize here be, and they came up with and this is a published report that I'm referencing here just for those listening, but there was multiple exploration targets that they looked at. They ranked them based on tier 1, tier 2 exploration targets, and the total target range was between 11 and 23 million tons at a grade between 0.3 and 0.5. So as mentioned, we're at 12.53 right now. So that effectively would be a doubling or tripling of what we have right now based on that report. That's just kind of one kind of metric I can give you guys right now. In terms of where I see this going, the interesting thing here is we have 4 satellite deposits at Pilot Mountain, Kevin, which is really important. If you go to our website, you can see the distribution of those 4 deposits. But what's really interesting as a geologist, when I look at these 4 deposits, they're all almost identical in terms of the mineralization, the alteration. And the reality is in Nevada, you can have what's called post-mineral sedimentary and volcanic cover. So it blankets a lot of the property. So the old timers came in there, they drilled what they could see at surface, which was these 4 satellite areas that were outcropping. But no team has ever gone into this property and explored in between those 4 areas. And as a geologist, when I see 4 satellite deposits that are almost identical, I go, well, no, they have to be connected. There's some way that these 4 deposits are connected at depth. There's some sort of causative intrusion, or there's some sort of way that these 4 systems are connected. So that's kind of a huge question mark that I have, is how are these 4 connected? I mean, right now we have about a kilometer and a half in between all 4 of them. So they're really widely spaced. So a huge area in between that's never really been looked at. And just a point of note here is we've actually gone in and done some high resolution geophysics across that central area. That work was done just before we did our IPO. And the great thing is now that we're listed, we can get access to those results. So we'll have a press release that covers the results of that survey, which is the first survey and company to ever go in and image in between those 4 deposit areas to see what's kind of underneath there. So we'll have those results out to the market as soon as I can get those analyzed, compiled, and interpreted, and then and put out. So that's a way that we're looking to already expand on the resource and focus on an area that's historically been overlooked, but I think there's huge potential there.
So the 12 million tons currently comes from the 4 spots, yeah?
Correct, yes.
So what grade is that at then?
So it's at 0.27% tungsten trioxide. That has significant copper, silver, and zinc credits. I know a lot of investors like equivalent metal values. The approximate equivalent, when you take into consideration the copper, silver, and zinc, works out to just under 0.5% tungsten trioxide equivalent. But the way it's just distributed, Kevin, is almost 11 million tons of the 12.53 are at what are called desert scheelite. And then the other very small amount is at a deposit called garnet. Apologies. So gunmetal and Good Hope, which have some really interesting intersections as well, have never been included into the resource. So huge potential to expand those as well and include those into the existing resource. But the majority is at desert scheelite right now.
Okay, so of the 4, over 11 million of that 12 million, is it just a one of those places?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and as a simple mind, is it too much to say that there's possibility that they're all similar size, or are some bigger than smaller, or what's the situation?
Yeah, no, just needs more drilling, right? Obviously, right now, the majority of the work has been done at desert scheelite. It's a larger outcropping body, so you can see actually at surface what's going on there. The size of the other ones, it's TBD. And then, as mentioned earlier, the other sort of big question mark is what's in between all 4 of them, which hasn't been looked at.
Yeah.
So when you kind of tie it all together, you go, wait, there's a big exploration story here as well. In addition to what we have right now in situ, which is allowing us to have some really interesting conversations about grant funding and things like that with various U.S. department agencies. So a lot of catalysts or potential catalysts for those who are invested in the company.
Yeah, if one intrusion came up and it's currently worth 11 million tons of tungsten, then you'd have to argue that there's no way that 11 million tons of tungsten came to that point without it being all over the place as well. You know, even just logically from a geological structure point of view, there's no way all the tungsten will have gone to one place.
No, exactly. And that's how we're looking at this too. And that's the first thing that caught my eye when I looked at this was, okay, we have 4 satellite deposits. We have 11 of the 12.53 at one of these deposits. There's a much bigger story here, and at Good Hope specifically, and once again, if you go to our website, you can see some of the drill intercepts there. Those are from surface, and there's some really high-grade copper there as well that have never been looked at more than a few drill holes. So a lot of work to be done here, and I think a lot of potential to unlock here and value to unlock for our shareholders.
And how much currently, and give us a bit of a story, is tungsten per ton?
What's the value of tungsten?
Yeah, how much is it sold for?
Yeah, so it's priced kind of differently than a lot of metals that your listeners would be familiar with. It's priced with a metric called a metric ton unit, an MTU, which trades between sort of, generally between 25,000 and 35,000 over the last couple of years. The price has done quite well over the last year here. It's sort of had a really sustained growth, which has been really exciting. But it's hard to compare to the coppers, the zincs, because they're traded on typically a pound basis or ounces over gold or silver, or other precious metals. But as mentioned, it's MTU, and just in terms of relative value, if you were to compare it on a
sounds like it sounds like it's about 3 times the price of copper then. Yes,
it's more than that. It's more than that. I don't have the number handy right now, but when you do convert it, it's quite a bit more valuable than copper on a equivalent basis.
Copper per metric ton is around the $9,000 to $10,000 per ton. So if this is 25 to 35, yes, around 3 times, 3.5 times. So 0.5 as an equivalent would put you at 1.5% to 2% copper, which would be, thank you very much, hallelujah, this is going to make money.
Yeah, exactly, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, just because a lot of people obviously are not that familiar with tungsten, but with the copper grades, anything over 1% in copper is pretty much bonanza. Anything underneath is still very viable in terms of how you get it out. So how do you get it out of the ground? Do you just dig, blast, and get the rock out of the ground, and what's the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing about desert scheelite, which is another attractive part of this property and this deposit specifically, is all the mineralization, as I mentioned, starts at surface. So it's currently been drilled down to approximately 200 to 250 meters depth, where it remains open. So there's a potential to continue to expand that zone down depth. But it starts from surface. So the way to get it out would be open pit, which is what investors want to hear, is what they want to look for. When you go underground, things can be, quite expensive, and the cutoffs become quite a bit higher. So what we have at Desert Scheelite right now is very minimal to open pitting or open pittable mining methods, which is super exciting for us. As mentioned, at Good Hope, which is not included in the existing resource right now, that's all from surface as well. So as we continue to expand this property and drill more, potentially there is an underground component here, but everything that we're seeing now is effectively at surface, which would allow someone to go in there with an open pit to mine it.
And then once the rock is brought up, what happens to it?
Yeah, so
how would you process it?
Yeah, so what you do then is you crush that rock and then you float it. So a lot of the really important metallurgical work has been done here, which is another really important checkbox that I think investors should look for in this industry. Because a lot of times you'll find companies make a great discovery, but when it comes to actually extracting that metal from the rock, sometimes the metallurgical results just aren't amenable to economic extraction. So the great thing about this project is one of those, important check boxes, which is metallurgical work, has been done. And that was done by the previous owners who were going to put this into production themselves. So those metallurgical studies have been done to a very advanced state. They all show very positive recoveries of tungsten, copper, silver, and zinc. So all 4 metals are recoverable. But what you do is you crush the rock, you float it, 2 concentrates are produced, and then you send those off to the offtake partner who wants to purchase those. The tungsten one will be the most valuable one, obviously. So there's specific partners in the U.S. That would be interested and that are interested in that concentrate.
Very good. So tell us a little bit about this type of gold in northern Nevada, did you say it was?
Yeah.
And what is so different about this in terms of how it's set up and the process to get it out?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a deposit type called Carlin type gold. And as mentioned, I used to work for Barrick Gold, so I know these systems quite well. And I won't go into too much technical detail because that can really bore people sometimes. But the long and short of it is, and I encourage those listening to just Google gold Carlin, or just look in northern Nevada and see all the different operating gold mines there. They're pretty incredible deposits there. I mean, there's deposits, 5, 10, 15, as I mentioned, at Cortez Hills, up to 50 million ounces of gold. It's the reason that Barrick and Newmont are the companies that they are. But I'll give kind of a quick overview as to why we're so excited geologically here. So the way that these deposits form, or the way that they're explored for, in northern Nevada, you have this thin blanket of rocks, which are called your upper plate rocks, which are non-reactive rocks. They don't host these big Carlin-type gold systems. And then immediately below that, you have what are called your lower plate rocks, which are carbonate rocks. They're limestones, and that's where you find your Carlin-type gold. So because of that upper layer, those upper plate rocks, which blanket a lot of northern Nevada, what will happen is you get these vertical faults that can allow gold that's been sourced from a Carlin-type gold deposit at depth to be remobilized, and then it moves up these faults, and then it's deposited at surface. So what you do is you actually explore for Carlin-type gold at surface. You find for little sniffs of it in these upper plate rocks, but you know if you find gold in the upper plate rocks, it's been remobilized from somewhere else, so you need to find the feeder zone for where this gold came from. And what's really exciting about Golconda Summit specifically is at surface, as I mentioned, those upper plate rocks, there's been some really high-grade gold that's been found there. I got the numbers in front of me. One trench here that was done historically returned 7.6 meters at 19.7 grams per ton gold. So really high-grade gold over really good width. There's some other really high-grade trenches as well. But that's all within your upper plate rocks. And no one has ever gone in and drilled for where this gold was remobilized from in the lower plate strata. So that's really exciting opportunity for us. You know, these deposits, as I mentioned, are I'm very familiar with, so they get me really excited. I know the potential because I used to live in Nevada, but we're looking forward to being the only company and the first company to ever go and test for the gold, the Carlin-type gold that's been remobilized at surface within these lower plate strata, which is where you're going to find your Carlin-type gold deposit. And as I mentioned, I mean, the prize here, when you find one of these systems, is generally very large, which is super exciting.
Can hear that passion and excitement coming.
Yeah.
Sure, man.
Yeah.
How deep is this normally?
It depends. You can, I mean, there's open pit Carlin-type mines. There's underground mines. The grade is typically, high enough to justify underground mining. Cortez Hills, where I used to work, that was open pit and underground. So it depends on the thickness of those upper plate rocks. And across northern Nevada, it can vary quite significantly. And the other really important point, and the reason I'm excited about this property in particular, is, as mentioned, the thickness can be as much as over 500, 600 meters. And there's a lot of companies that are trading in Canada, drilling through 500-600 meters of upper plate rocks, looking for sniffs of Carlin-type gold within the lower plate strata. At Golconda Summit, the upper plate rocks are 100 meters thick, which is incredibly thin for northern Nevada standards. So we don't have much overburden to drill through here to see what's lurking beneath in those lower plate rocks.
Very good. So again, about the other two assets, you're excited about these two assets. The other two assets are going to sit on the side until progress is made in these two assets, or what do you expect?
The reality is with Pilot Mountain, that's a project that could sit in a company alone, no doubt, with the amount of work that needs to be done there and the potential there. But what we've done is we want to give our investors as many kicks at the can as possible. There's a huge story at Pilot that we're going to be pushing forward at pace. Golconda Summit, as you could tell with my enthusiasm, there's a lot of excitement there, so we're going to be pushing that one forward, drilling that one as well. But we'd be remiss to not push everything in the project in the portfolio forward. So there'll be a bit of work happening at Garfield and Stonewall. We actually undertook a high resolution soil sampling campaign at Garfield before we listed. So we'll have those results out to the market in the next couple of weeks here. So we'll be deploying capital towards those assets as well. But the important thing to note is that the majority of the use of proceeds from the IPO will go towards Pilot Mountain. Second in line will be Golconda, and then Garfield and Stonewall after that. But we're looking to push everything forward in tandem, with the majority of the funds going towards those top two projects.
And Garfield and Stonewall are what? What's in the ground?
Yeah, so Garfield is a copper, gold, silver property. What's interesting was when I actually was doing the IPO marketing roadshow, a few people, said, wait a second, tell me about that Garfield property, because there's some really high-grade copper at surface there. And it's the reason why we've gone and done a high-resolution soil sampling campaign. But people that looked at it go, wait a second, what is this one? Like, you even told me about this one. Like, well, there's almost too much to focus on, right? We got Pilot, we got Golconda, but it's copper, gold, silver, and then Stonewall is gold, silver. So we got a kind of a good blend of different metals, with tungsten being kind of the main focus right now, and then gold after that.
If it was to be a takeaway and a nice cold drink, what would it be in the middle of the week?
So the middle of the week, the takeaway here, I think, is the quality of the assets that we have. Pilot Mountain, I think, when you look at the exploration, you look at the various funding sources and grants, that are available now through the U.S. government. There's so many catalysts that are available from that one particular asset. And then Golconda as well, we have fantastic gold opportunities. So I think it's the quality of the assets. We have a very technical team pushing us forward that has done a lot of work in Nevada, is well connected in Nevada. And then just another important note here, and I think this is, as someone who invests in the industry myself, capital structure and the way the company structured is so important to the success of these companies. I don't think we've mentioned this yet, but we have one very large and supportive shareholder in Power Metal Resources. On top of that, we have 2 high net worth individuals who came into the IPO placing. So in terms of the free float, it's less than 29%. And a lot of that is held by management and insiders and other people alike. So, when you see these companies that have really blown out capital structures, there's billions of shares in issue into every, everyone and their dog. It's hard for those companies to make a lot of traction when they have, good news out. Whereas at Golden Metal, it's incredibly tightly held, very low free float. So I think with what should be and what we expect to be some exciting news coming up, I think that just allows the company to better perform and the stock to perform on the back of really good news with that really good clean capital structure in mind.
So if you had to have a takeaway and a cold drink, whether it be beer or something else, what would it be?
That's a great question. I'm a Nando's guy.
Oh, I had Nando's last night because
yeah.
Final day at school, and I was like, "Where do you want to go?" She's like, "Nando, cheeky Nando."
Yeah,
I mean,
cheeky Nando. Absolutely. I think I'd get, I might get a full chicken, a couple sides, and then cold beer.
Yeah, or a bottomless refill, man. You get bottomless refills are good.
Yeah, there you go. We're going with Nando's though.
Nando's and cold refill. Okay.
I know the Brits will appreciate that answer because it's pretty popular here, which is great. You can see why.
Very good.
No, I mean, from my perspective, obviously, doing a bit of research before the interview, you've put a lot of meat on the bone in terms of what is available. I can quite obviously see that your enthusiasm should increase the share price on its own. So, the scenario is, let's hope that the tungsten is discovered in greater quantity, because that really will change the game, I think, in your availability to produce X tons of tungsten every year, or X thousand tons of tungsten every year, and then that's going to put you in a great situation. I think the thing we didn't really touch on a great deal was how America really does want to help and fund you to do that tungsten because of such a critical metal. But maybe that's for another time when we can be more specific about how that whole process works. But basically, the US is saying, here's some money, make sure it happens. And I think with the grants. So let's hope that happens. Good luck with everything you do. Speak to you again, hopefully.
Oliver Friesen, CEO and Executive Director of Golden Metal Resources. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for chatting, gents. And just on that note there, Kevin, in terms of the grant funding, I mean, it's a podcast in itself. The amount of funding that's available through all the different agencies, DOD, DOM, DOC, DOE, it's pretty incredible. The amount of money the federal government's put behind this. So we'll definitely have to catch up again. I can fill everyone in on how that process goes and what we're doing to push that forward. So thanks again for chatting, gents, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
This podcast was brought to you by Roast PR Limited. If you would like to appear on a future episode of The Sunday Roast, please email admin@thesundayroast.net.